Alright, the AB 412 freight car brake equipment instruction pamphlet number 50623, March 1993, the New York Air Brake Company, 420 Lexington Avenue, New York, New York. Contents: the AB 412 freight brake equipment description of the parts: AB 412 valves, 412 UE brake cylinder, operation of the equipment, full release charge, brake application release for the duplex release valve, piston travel instruction for application reinforced flange union fittings. Alright. Alright, the AB 412 freight brake equipment. The AAR recommendation for equipment specifies 60% brake ratio, empty car weight, and maximum leverage ratio of 9 to 1. Under these limitations, standard AB equipment with 10-inch brake cylinders is applicable to cars with light weight of 58,000 pounds or less. However, the heavier cars require increased brake cylinder force. The AB 412 equipment is designed to use on cars having an empty weight exceeding 58,000 pounds and produce a higher braking effort with a 12-inch brake cylinder with the same air consumption as the standard 10-inch AB equipment. The AB 412 freight brake equipment is sometimes same as the standard AB equipment covered in instruction pamphlet number 5062 with the following exemptions. The standard 10-inch brake cylinder is replaced with a double cylinder figure 6, 1 and 4 inch diameter with other 12-inch small cylinder accent take upon with the rigging selecting adjusting piston travel for large cylinder. Previous development pressure large cylinder combination provides higher braking force than a single 12-inch cylinder. The volume of the air required no greater than the used in the standard 10-inch brake cylinder of the AB equipment. The force value of 4 to 12 duplex brake cylinder at 50 pounds per square inch is approximately 6,350 pounds. The standard AB 12 AB 412 the standard AB valve is replaced by the AB 412 valve, which includes standard surface emergency portion and special pipe bracket. Figure 1 shows the AB 412 showing transfer valve portion and location pipe bracket, transfer valve portion. Figure 2 end view of the 412 valve showing location transfer valve on pipe bracket. To which transfer valve portion is attached shown in figure 1 with the portion control the flow of air between the 4-inch take-up cylinder and the 12-inch brake cylinder during the brake application and relief. The application permitted the development of the predetermined take-up cylinder pressure, take-up brake rigging slack. Before pressure is submitted to the 12-inch brake cylinder, it releases brake cylinder pressure previous to the take-up the cylinder release in order to relieve the latch mechanism take-up cylinder for the brake rigging stress. Description of parts. A previously noted exemption of the brake cylinder and the AB valve. The parts of the AB 412 valve include a reservoir are the same as those standard AB freight brake equipment, fully described in instruction pamphlet number 5062. One addition pipe used as being the 3/8 inch take-up cylinder pipe is shown pipe diagram figure 8. AB 412 valve shown in figure 1-4. The AB 412 valve consists of 4 portions: service portion, emergency portion, pipe bracket, and transfer valve portion. The service and emergency portions are the standard AB portions. Pipe bracket and special having in back face. Finish accommodated transfer valve portion indicated with a pipe diagram figure 8. And this pipe grade is additional 3/8 of an inch pipe connection 16, which connects to the take-up cylinder. Figure 3 shows the outline of the AB 412 showing transfer valve portion location pipe bracket. Section 4 view of the transfer valve portion of the AB 4x12 valve. The transfer valve portion shown in figure 1-4 stands attached with the 2-step of the nuts with the pipe wrapper considered the body over the 175 with the bottom cover 206 with the top cover 193. Transfer piston 176 figure 4 contained between the top of the bottom cover for the control of the position of the sliding valve 188. The piston 2 heads with the lower being fitted with the cylinder and piston ring 187. The upper being sliding fitting into the cylinder. Has 2 seals, lower seal 177 on which the piston set in the brake application position. An upper B with the seal of the gasket 213 release position. And spring 184 move the position, lower the position where a predetermined differential between auxiliary reservoir pressure take-up cylinder pressure is developed during brake application. Your slide valve 188 has two positions: control of the piston moving it, upper release position, connect with the brake cylinder directly through the Chevette slide valve exhaust, lower applied position, and its contact connects auxiliary reservoir air surface portion, brake cylinder, and control of the position, cutoff valve 210, opening the valve release position, closing the brake application position. Cutoff valve 210 is ring fitted with the cylinder out one piston to ring 211. And release position slide valve 188, cutoff valve is held for the lower position by spring 212. Opening the brake cylinder with a transfer valve exhaust fitting 215. This slide valve moves and lowers applied position amidst pressure of the chamber beneath the cutoff valve, moving it upward on the seal gasket 213 close off the exhaust. The cutoff valve then ensures the brake cylinder is open atmosphere, preventing buildup of the pressure for the air intake up the cylinder pressure sufficient to take up the slack, evidence of movement of the slide valve in lower position. Exhaust valve 196, control of the exhaust for the take-up cylinder, and position control for the diaphragm 203, which subject to the combined spring pressure, brake cylinder pressure, upper face, opposing air from the lower face, lateral pressure is controlled with the service slide valve that supplies auxiliary reservoir air. When the slide valve is in release position, auxiliary reservoir air pressure exceeds the combined spring take-up cylinder pressure. It deflects diaphragm 203 upward, moving to follower 211, push spring pusher pin 194 on exhaust seat, on the unseats exhaust valve 194, opening the take-up cylinder passage to the service slide valve with exhaust. When the brakes are applied with the chamber beneath, the diaphragm is connected to the service slide valve with exhaust. Spring pressure is deflected with the diaphragm, spring retainer pusher down, relieving the pressure on the exhaust valve, which is seated by spring 197, closing the take-up cylinder and the exhaust. There are three ball checks, 192, two not shown, figure 4, with the one prevented the development of brake cylinder pressure prior to the development of take-up cylinder pressure. The second prevents the backflow of the take-up cylinder and brake cylinder. Its lateral should be lower. Third prevents the take-up cylinder air through the brake cylinder exhaust when the transfer valve is in the upper position. Ball check valve, ball check 207, flat check 208 is the bottom cover permit release of the brake cylinder. Take up the cylinders mean with the duplex valve, the when the surface port is closed with the same car, the normal release cannot otherwise be obtained. Spring 209 normally sees the flat check valve. The two check valves in series provide with a double protection action, double protection against the undesired reverse flow auxiliary reservoir air to the large face of transferred piston. Choke 195 is located with the take-up cylinder exhaust of the patch of the retards release the flow of the take-up cylinder pressure until the brake cylinder pressure is released. Exhaust elbow 215 is equipped with the excluder 216 to prevent entry of the insects. 412, the UE brake cylinder figure 5, 6, and 7. The 412 UE brake cylinder figure 5, 7 consists of the body 2 contain 12-inch pistons, 4 in piston rod and a hollow sleeve with a notch push rod. 10. Move the non-pressure of the head. 13. Cast integral take-up cylinder, later having 4-inch piston. 55. Which hollow sleeve within which rod is 72 freely moves. Figure 5 shows the exterior view of the 412 brake cylinder. Alright, figures, and then over here would be the other figure. Your figure 6 section view of the 412 UE brake cylinder. Or the latching mechanism attached to the end of the hollow rod, 12-inch piston, inconsistent with the latch block with a 39, figure 6 with the wedge, houses with the latch 40, pivoted on pin 41, release position, pin 44, engaged with non-pressure head forcing, latch 40, clear of the road, rod, the brake of is applied with the pressure initially admitted with the take-up of the cylinder, piston moves out, the ends of the bolt of the brake cylinder, take-up cylinder are pinned with the live cylinder lever so that the brake cylinder rod initially moves out. With the take-up cylinder rod, after the pressure builds up, the take-up cylinder later takes up the brake ring slack, after which pressure builds up the starts in the brake cylinder, which those piston moves out carrying the latch mechanism. This moves pin 44 engagement over the non-pressure head, whereupon spring 46 exerts force to the pull of the latch 40 into engagement with the rod, wet surface of the latching engagement, locking notches rod over the rod, so the rod now moves within the piston, pressure develops in the brake cylinder. Both pistons are equipped with the AB type packing cup 4 and 57, which are lubricated with a tapped opening that normally plugged as shown in figure 6. Both rods are fitted. Lubricators consist of felt swab 26 and 61, which are lubricated with a tapped opening with the brake cylinder rod should be lubricated to maintain accordance with a practice established. Steering AB cylinders is outlined in maintenance pamphlet number 2391. Spring chamber 4-inch and 12 cylinders are connected with a curled hair strainer 14, figure 7. Acts as a breather for both. Alright, figure 7 outlines a view of the 412 UE brake cylinder. Or the pipe connection provided with the reinforced unions, 1 inch for the 12-inch cylinder and 3/8 of an inch for the 4-inch cylinder. Operation of the equipment operation. So for the emergency portion described in the instruction pamphlet 5062. The description being concerned with only with the transfer function of the equipment. Figure 10 back of the pamphlet show the equipment with a poorly diagrammatic way with the actual proportion and construction parts of the disregard with the necessary to make connections operations more easily understood. Alright, full release and charging position. Brake pipe air pass with the combined branch pipe cutout dirt collector passes B and then through the curled hair strainer 6 to the face of the service position. 33, move with the piston attached slide valve with the release position. Move with the 2 feet with the grooves V in the service position. Brake pipe flow with the chamber back of the piston, thence through the passage of the auxiliary reservoir, which is thus stored charge and the brake pipe pressure with the surface slide valve in the release position cavity F registered with the port R in the seat, permitting auxiliary reservoir air to flow through the passage to meet passage M. Transfer valve portions where it builds up in the chamber S beneath the diaphragm 203. The pressure of the spring 200 overcoming the diaphragm deflected upward on the push pin 194. Unseats exhaust valve 196. Slide valve chamber 5 F is open through the seat. And then it shows the picture of the view of the AB4 pipe valve bracket with auxiliary reservoir pressure retaining valve, dirt collector, pipe and emergency reservoir, brake cylinder. So the branch pipe, standard pipe, nipple, glad hand, AB412, combined dirt collector pipe cut out, emergency reservoir, auxiliary reservoir from the 2 component of the emergency reservoir, auxiliary reservoir, pressure retaining valve, extra heavy pipe, brake cylinder pipe, take up cylinder 4U, brake cylinder, and steering nipple of the angle cock and hose with a coupling. Port 16A, ball check 192, choke with a 195, passes 16F, with exhaust valve 196 with the spring chamber, then ends through with the number passes 9C9 and C3. Surface slide cavity B with the passage 10, retaining valve with exhaust with take up the cylinder, likewise to obtain retaining valve with exhaust. Passes 16B, choke 195, passage with the 116F with the pass exhaust with the 196 end there and some above. The 12-inch brake cylinder is connected with the passage of the C with the pass in shot with the valve 126 passage C2, 9A, 9B, pass with the ball check 192, pass the 9C9 and the C3. Surface slide valve cavity B with the retaining valve exhaust. Air with auxiliary reservoir flow with the passage A1 for the pipe bracket with the transfer valve portion, then pass the check valve 208 through the passage A2 with the chamber R on the V with the transfer piston 176 with the chamber F above the piston. Open atmosphere slide surface slide valve with exhaust auxiliary reservoir pressure chamber R. Receive the force of spring 184. Therefore, move the piston attached slide valve 188. Their upper position. Bead end for the upper face of the piston sealing with a gasket 213. The piston moves from lower seal auxiliary reservoir air chamber R flows through the passage A4 and choke K and chamber E with the piston sealed with a bead and N pressure in chamber E with a cutoff of the chamber F with the opposite face. With the slide valve 180 upper position chamber, the H beneath the cutoff piston 210 connect with the passage 16C cavity U, the slide valve with the passage 9H2. Chamber M above the cutoff position. Chamber M is also connected through the passage of the 9F through the existing fitting. 215 atmospheric pressure on both side faces of the cutoff. Valve spring 212 holds the valve away for the upper seal of the cavity. U slide with the valve and connection passage NH to NA, which leave with the 12-inch brake cylinder. Therefore, later connect to the transfer valve exhaust 215, as well as retaining valve exhaust piston previously explained. Alright, brake application. When brake pipe reduction is made with the ply with the brake slides, service slide valve move service position described in the instruction pamphlet 5062 with the cavity F with the cutoff with the C with the port R closing off with the auxiliary reservoir connection. Passes M cavity B connects with the port R to retain valve exhaust 10. Air chamber S the transfer valve through therefore vented with the passenger and passage M port R cavity B. Surface slide valve, retaining valve, exhaust spring 200, then move of the pusher pin 194. After spring 197, seat exhaust and valve 196 with slider. Surface slider valve, auxiliary reservoir, airflows, port C5. Surface part C3, C for the then sends passage 9, slide valve chamber F, transfer valve for chamber F with the passage 16A. Pass ball check 192 through passage 16B, 16 take up cylinder. Ball check 192 prevents auxiliary reservoir airflow passes 9C to 9B and to the ends brake cylinder. Previously, the development and take up cylinder pressure. Meanwhile, cutoff valve 210 remains down, open into the brake cylinder to the transfer valve exhaust, thereby ensuring that there is sufficient pressure to take up the cylinder to take up the brake cylinder rigging slack before pressure is emitted to the brake cylinder. Auxiliary reservoir pressure chamber F, which of the action downward large area transfer position piston 176 is increasing auxiliary reservoir pressure chamber E and R, acting upon the piston decrease through passage A2 and A4, where air pressure direct acting on the piston with a reach of the predetermined differential spring 184 will move the piston downward upward seal and breaking the seal permits pressure of the chamber E to equalize with the pressure chamber F, so the pressure acting to keep the piston with the upper piston position immediately less than before the seal was broken. Choke F restrict the auxiliary reservoir air supply to chamber air to permit rapid equalization between chambers E and F. Auxiliary reservoir pressure is now acting only on lower face small piston spring face, assisted by air pressure chamber F sufficient to move the piston downward opposed with auxiliary reservoir pressure acting upon under the area of the large piston, same force opposed by auxiliary reservoir pressure acting on small area with a small piston result will increase the differential force downward, which will cover the piston slide valve to move down with a snapping action transfer valve, so the design the action takes place when there is approximately 50 pounds developed in the slide valve chamber F to take up the cylinder after the auxiliary reservoir air flows to the 12-inch brake cylinder, while in the transfer slide 188 lower position passage 9 connecting surface slide valve service port C3 cut off of the chamber F. Then take up cylinders connected by connectivity U into the transfer slide valve 188 passages 9A and C2 past the in-shaft slide valve 126 passes C with the 12-inch brake cylinder, and the lower position slide valve opens past the 16C and the slide valve chamber air of the later flow of the chamber H beneath the cutoff valve 210. Low pressure in chamber H sufficient to overcome spring 212, so with the cutoff valve 210 is promptly moved in the upper position, seating on the gasket, closing off exhaust 215 when transfer valves move in the lower position. If you take up the cylinder pressure at any time should be lower than 12-inch brake cylinder pressure. These pressures will equalize by flow of the air through the 12-inch brake cylinder, passage C, past in-shot valve 126, passage C2, 9A and 9B and 9D, pass ball check 192A, passage 16D, and 16C, to chamber F, past 16, take up the cylinder, ball check 192 prevents take up the cylinder air flowing with the reverse direction of the 12-inch brake cylinder when the latter pressure is lower than that. Take up cylinder is when brake is partially applied. As pressure initial builds up, the take up cylinder piston moves out with the air as the pressure increases the piston. Take up the slack on the brake rig when the piston push rods, both brake cylinder connect with the same cylinder lever. Consequently, the notch push rod 10 over the 12-inch brake cylinder moves out with the take up cylinder push rod 72. When the transfer piston slide moves down, the piston over the 12-inch brake cylinder moves out, carrying with it the latch mechanism. Movement of the 12-inch brake cylinder piston takes release between pin 44 from contact with the cylinder head, allows latch spring 46 to attach the spring guide 47, the puller upper and latch with the 40 left, as the latch pit 40 pivot the pin 41 through the lower end of the wedge-shaped portion of the latch engages the notch and push rod 10, firmly locking push rod cylinder piston rod so that the notch rod moves out with the cylinder piston. Air pressure developed in the cylinder as it takes up the cylinders, takes up the slack. Brake rigging compensation is made with the brake shoe where fixed for the travel of the 12-inch brake cylinder obtained. Slot and live lever connection, 12-inch brake cylinder push rod, and for the piston travel therefore volume in the cylinder amount, which will provide the same brake cylinder pressure for any given pipe reduction that is obtained with the standard AB equipment. Taking up cylinder therefore takes up slack on the brake ring and adjusts the position of the brake cylinder push rod as so the slotted pin hole will allow the predetermined brake cylinder piston travel with the pressure introduced in the brake cylinder. In other words, there's always a fixed volume relation between the auxiliary reservoir and brake cylinder. Therefore, the extent of braking effort obtained with it depends on the extent of the equalization pressure between the auxiliary reservoir brake cylinder. Later, in turn, control of the amount of the brake pipe reduction relation, such that the 350-pound equalization obtained from full surface reduction, 70-pound brake pipe pressure, any less than brake pipe reduction will, therefore, produce the same ratio of the brake cylinder pressure as obtained with the standard 10-inch AB equipment. Release. When the brake is released, recharging service piston slide valve move the release position where to the cavity B, and the service slide valve connect piston port through C3 to the retained valve exhaust valve cavity F. Again, connects auxiliary reservoir air to port R and passage M, braking cylinder air through, thus flows through the passage C, past in shot 126, passage C2, passage 9A, cavity U, and the transfer slide valve passage 9 and C3. Cavity B in the service slide valve pipe to 10, retaining valve exhaust. For any reason, transfer slide valve in its upper position time brake cylinder air can flow from the passage 9A to 9B past ball check 192 in passages 90C and 9, retaining valve exhaust. Brake cylinder piston spring 22, then move the piston forward, notch rod 10, latch 40 back until the release of the pin 44 connects with the non-pressure head with the force of the release pin back, disengaging latch 44 from the notch rod, permitting later to move it into the hollow piston sleeve of the release position. Meanwhile, auxiliary reservoir air from the passage built to the chamber F of the transfer portion, brake cylinder air from the passage 9C presents spring chamber above the diaphragm 203. Auxiliary reservoir increasing the brake cylinder while increasing brake cylinder pressure for the decreasing auxiliary reservoir pressure is in chamber S, become 35 pounds or higher. Brake cylinder pressure above the diaphragm spring 200 compressed, and the diaphragm follower 201, pusher 194, move with the unseating exhaust valve 196. Take up cylinder air from the flows for the pass 16, 16B, choke 195, pass 16F, pass. Exhaust valve 196 for the spring chamber, then through passage 9C and the 9. Surface valve slides exhaust cavity B, retaining valve with exhaust interval required to obtain 35-pound differential to open exhaust valve 196. The restricted flow of the take-up of the cylinder air choke with the 195 retards the exhaust take-up cylinder air to ensure the brake cylinder and piston returns to the least. Disengage the latch before take-up cylinder pressure is materially reduced. Chamber F pressure also reduce the take-up of the cylinder pressure through passage 16A. Best ball checks 192B, passage 16F, the unseated exhaust valve 196 the retaining valve exhaust. Chamber F pressure for the decrease of the auxiliary reservoir pressure. Chamber R beneath the piston increase the pressure differential. Move the piston slide valve up before the pressure exhaust of chamber F. The upper piston position of the slide valve uncovers the port 9 connecting chamber F directly with the retaining valve exhaust through the service slide valve cavity B. Ball check 192 prevents take-up cylinder air from the chamber F, then to the exhaust, thereby impose a delay with the release take-up cylinder air through choke 185 with the transfer valve in the upper position. In its upper position, slide valve 188 connects with port 16C with the 9H, thereby connecting chamber M and the H for the equalizing pressure above the below the cutoff of the valve of 210. Spring 212, move with the valve of the upper conceal with the connect with the brake cylinder passage 9A through cavity U with the slide valve into S9H, path of the cutoff valve passage 9F, and exhausting fitting 215. Releasing with the duplex release valve of the brake may be relieved by means of the duplex release valve of the vent with the brake pipe depleted with the time of the brake is applied when the car is set out within the brake and allow locomotive to detach from the train under the condition surface live valve application position exhaust port is closed. Auxiliary reservoir pressure exhausted from chambers S under the diaphragm 203 transfer valve with the passage M. Cavity B surface live valve retaining with the valve exhaust therefore 200 returns. Pusher pin 194 lower position, permitting 197 in the seat. Exhaust 196. Take up the cylinder pressure for the chamber F. The pressure that cannot be released path the exhaust valve normal manner. By opening duplex relay air valve with the 12 brake cylinder vented with the auxiliary reservoir, so as long as there's surface port C valve with the surface slide with the valve with the open, permitting back flow through the brake cylinder to the auxiliary reservoir have with the surface piston tail 39. May move graduating valve 34 to close surface port C5 before brake cylinder is entirely released in a manner. Under this condition, complete release of the take-up cylinder of the brake cylinder pressure effect with the ball check 207 and ball check 208. Piston spring 184 transfers 176 on 7 piston. Its slide valve 188 to their lower position auxiliary reservoir air chamber. Air in the chamber R deplete with the opening with a duplex release valve to take up the cylinder. Air then flows the passage 16 chamber F with the pass of the large piston chamber E, then through passage A3, choke Y pass check valve 208 and 209 through passage A1 and A, pass of the auxiliary reservoir valve 69 atmosphere. As take up cylinder pressure for the reduce the below with the low pressure may be trapped with the brake cylinder. Higher brake cylinder pressure because 9D. 1 seat ball check 192 flow with the passage 16D and 16C. In the chamber F, the lens path of the large piston, the duplex release valve exhaust described in preceding sentence. As other times, ball check 207 and flat check 208 are being held seated by spring 209 to prevent flow of the auxiliary reservoir air to piston chamber E. Otherwise might prevent piston movement to the lower piston when unintended. Alright, piston travel. The minimum travel of the 4-inch take up of the cylinder piston should be adjusted to 7 inches, 40-pound pressure for the cylinder. Maximum piston travel to 12 inches permissible. The small diameter take up the cylinder makes up, if possible, to exceed maximum 9-inch travel prescribed in the AR from 10-inch equipment without material affecting the brake cylinder pressure. Range of piston travel from 7 inches to 12 inch take up the cylinder, provided with a greatly increase the brake shoe wear with the 412 freight brake as compared with the standard 10 inch 4AB equipment without readjustment piston travel. Increase the range of piston travel to 7 to 9 inches to 7 to 12, provided with a degree of the brake shoe wear, making possible a replacement of one or more brake shoes. Beforehand readjustment of travel may be made, and therefore power value of 412 equipment will remain substantially constant without readjustment of the piston travel. Stated differently, functioning with a take-up of cylinder equivalent with the employment of the automatic slack adjuster, but without necessity adjusting travel each time the brake shoe is replaced. Alright, instruction for the application reinforced flange union fittings. The purpose of the reinforced flange union fittings is to produce with a pipe joint that can be made with a maintained permanently airtight with the same type of avoid with a costly failure with the road, serve with the breakage of pipe fittings. Fittings designed to clamp the pipe back thread as to relieve the thread with the tension stress and arrange for the removal of the reapplications are made conveniently. Unless the fittings are installed correctly, the protection against the pipe failure with the pitting of the exposed threads may be lost accomplished fully. The purpose of the fittings and pipe fittings also should be made up of its fouls. However, slipping the clamp nut with the anchor ring over the thread end of the pipe with the flange fitting must be screwed on the pipe threads to make up the rigid airtight joint threads. When the bolt holes are in line, the tapped hole of the face from which the is bolted anchor ring clamping nut must not then be moved into play with the nut firmly tightened so that a solidly closed anchor ring on the pipe. And show the figure 9, show the flange union connection, even the valve of the brake cylinder, reservoir, dirt collector, and branches. Clamping nut, Wabco, gasket, union flange, gasket anchor ring. To ensure the anchor ring will have the full supporting bearing on the pipe, the thread must be straight with that is cut with a substantially part of the axis of the pipe with the this will appear with the automatic pipe threading tool with its proper condition. This pipe must be formed with the fitted when in place with the face of the flange fitting gasket removed with the contacting squarely with the surface to which will be clamped. Bolt holes will be in line. Permanent application of the cap screws without springing in the pipe of the gasket can be applied with the fitting of the clamp in place with a cap screw and bolt, but it should be tightened solidly. Design of the pipe running from the clamping points must be then be such that the pipe with sufficient flexibility itself. Take up the small deflection that may be to cover the movements of the car body. Flexibility best is secured by designing pipe running to have one or more easy bends not less than 6-inch radius. Where forming a pipe of the insulation flange union is made with the scrub, there will be adequate mechanical strength in the flange unit assembly, cause of the pipe to deflect sufficient compensate with the normal maximum car body movements without the production of excessive stress within the fittings. When the assembly is made in accordance with the above, the instruction pipe and flanges will be free from the initial tension of the flange fitting drawn with a solid metal. Therefore, by freeing any of the motion pipe will have the solid metal support outside the thread joint, acting as a fulcrum, changing any stress exposed pipe threads, fine tension, small area shear force on hole but diameter pipe. The shear force may be many times greater than tension force cited without causing failure. And this shows a picture of the AB 412 freight brake equipment diagrammic. Show the take-up cylinder and brake cylinder, and then you have your cylinder lever. That's the 4-inch and the 12-inch. The brake cylinder take-up brake pipe, and then you have the duplex release valve service portion, and then then the transfer valve portion, your pressure retaining valve, and then over here would be housing couple, in-count, branch T, combined dirt collector, cutout cock, in-shot valve, emergency prison portion, pipe bracket, transfer valve portion, duplex valve, brake cylinder, hosing, angle cock, transfer valve portion, pressure valve, retaining valve, and then that is the completement of that's the AB 412 freight car brake equipment instruction pamphlet number 50623, March 1939, the New York Air Brake Company, and that's for freight cars. Testing.